community leaders. Welcome to the 2024 Ottawa City Building Summit. Are you ready to have conversations about creating our future? Thank you all for being here this morning. Isn't this venue stunning? And the sun came out for all of us, and I hope you had a wonderful time networking and connecting with each other. We're so happy to be back here in the Horticulture Building. My name is Su-Ling Ching, and it is my honor to be the President and CEO of the Ottawa Board of Trade. And I am joined this morning by my co-host, Mr. Michael Curran, who's the President and Publisher of the Ottawa Business Journal, today's premier business media outlet. We are grateful to be gathered here at this amazing heritage site in Lansdowne Park. Our nation's capital, Ottawa, is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. The peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence continue to nurture this land. We honor the peoples and land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. We honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. And I know some of us here are also celebrating Passover, and we want to say happy Passover and thank you for being here today. I hope all of you enjoyed your networking time. You had a chance to make some meaningful connections this morning as our business and community leaders. We thank you for making the time to be here and engage in these conversations about our collective future. Ottawa is a very important city, Canada's capital city, and Canada in one city. As such, we have a unique set of strengths and vulnerabilities, challenges, and most importantly, opportunities. And we have a particular responsibility to ensure it thrives and serves as a symbol of hope and prosperity for our country and for our world. As city builders, the events of the last 4 years summons us to think and act differently moving forward, to be more collaborative, inclusive, innovative, and thoughtful in designing our future. There are many things that remain outside our immediate control, but today we are here to talk about the things that we can do together to build up Ottawa, to leverage the lessons that we have learned, and to capitalize on our unique strengths, including the fact that we are Canada's capital city with robust private, public, and third sectors. The Ottawa Board of Trade is fully committed to our role and responsibility as the voice of business and a key advocate for economic growth. We stand firm in our mission to cultivate a thriving, world-class business community, one that drives affordable, inclusive, and sustainable city building and community prosperity. We appreciate our local elected officials at every level of government for your ongoing dedication. We remain committed to convening thought leaders who are uniquely positioned to inform, inspire, and impact our collective outcomes. Today is no exception. Our agenda has been designed to highlight key conversations about a whole of community, multifaceted approach to city building. We will hear from experts from across the country and from within the federal government about impacting our downtown. We will learn about the role of energy transition in our economy. We will see city building through the eyes of young leaders who are dedicated to being involved. We will share insights on housing from our keynote speaker, Dr. Mike Moffat of the Smart Prosperity Institute, and we will receive updates on some of the highest impact projects happening in our city right now. We encourage you to keep the conversation going online by using the hashtag #OttCityBuild. Please note our agenda and speaker bios can be found by using the QR code. I would like to acknowledge a few of our guests today. First, it is my honor to work with a group of volunteers on our Board of Directors at the Board of Trade. I would like to thank you for your leadership. Brendan McGinty, Ian Sherman, Robert Rayon, Ruby Williams, Priya Balu, Hugh Gorman, Julie Lupinacci, Rick Chase, Aaron Benjamin, and Carla Briones. Thank you for your ongoing leadership and dedication. I would like to welcome today the Honourable Mona Fortier. Thank you for joining us, and I believe MP Yasser Naqvi will be joining us as well. We're very grateful for your ongoing leadership and your collaboration. Thank you. I would like to acknowledge many economic partners that we have in the room today that work with us ongoing on these events and other key advocacy initiatives, including Acobia, the Ottawa Gatineau Hotel Association, the Ottawa Real Estate Board, United Way of Eastern Ontario, the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association, Ottawa Tourism, the Ottawa Climate Action Fund, Invest Ottawa, and the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group. Without you, we would not have the important partnerships that we need to move forward on our economic growth agenda. So thank you for being here today. I would like to say thank you to the OBOT Pillar partners who are joining us here today and who support directly the advocacy and economic development work that we are doing on behalf of the entire community. Thank you to Enbridge Gas, BDO Canada, CLV Group, Interret REIT, Colonnade Bridgeport, Claridge Homes, Deloitte, Meridian Credit Union, National Capital Commission, QuadReal, and BOMA Ottawa. Thank you for being here and for your ongoing support of the work of the Board of Trade. Special welcome to our delegates from Youth Ottawa and our next generation of community leaders and city builders. I would also like to say thank you to our event partners who make this event possible. Our lead sponsor, Enbridge Gas, no, is it called Enbridge? Yeah, Enbridge Gas. Supporting sponsors, City of Ottawa, Regional Group, WSP, National Capital Commission, thank you for your support. Also to our global partners, Oakwood Designers and Builders and Casino Lac Limi, and our AV sponsor, Event Design, our food and beverage partner, My Catering Group, and Rogers TV. If I could have all of the representatives actually from our sponsors just stand up to be recognized, I would appreciate that. We really appreciate everybody being here today, but without our sponsors, it wouldn't be possible. So we very much appreciate your support. Okay, so now we're going to turn our attention to the screens because we're not being joined virtually, as many of you know because you follow him on social media. His Worship Mayor Mark Sutcliffe is in London on a mission with our friends from Ottawa Tourism, but he very much wanted to be here and to send a message, so he has pre-recorded a video message for all of you here today. Can we run video?
Thank you, Su Ling. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. I am in London right now, as you can see behind me, but we are really promoting Ottawa right now. This is a very busy Team Ottawa mission that was organized by Ottawa Tourism and with the participation of Invest Ottawa. So I'm very happy to be joining you all today and to share a few thoughts. As you know, this is both a challenging time and an exciting time for Ottawa. We have a lot of difficult issues to resolve, but we also have some amazing opportunities. Like many other cities, we are tackling challenges like affordability, public transit, mental health and homelessness, housing, and public safety. But we have a great team that is already working hard to respond to these issues, including many of the people and organizations in the room today, like the Board of Trade. It has been a busy time in our city, and I want to mention a few steps we've taken and a few wins and the big opportunity that we have going forward. First of all, we're making huge investments in infrastructure, including fixing our roads. That's something I've heard a lot about from businesses and residents. We've created a new department of the city, just did that last week, that will tackle our top priorities, including economic development and housing. And we're getting some significant funding from other levels of government. A couple of months ago, we announced more than $176 million in federal government support through the Housing Accelerator Fund. And then just a few weeks ago at the Mayor's Breakfast, Premier Doug Ford and I announced an agreement to see more than $543 million in provincial funds invested in Ottawa. And just last week, Prime Minister Trudeau and I met at City Hall to talk about working closely together to solve Ottawa's unique challenges, including revitalizing our downtown. It was actually the first time that a sitting Prime Minister has visited Ottawa City Hall for a meeting with the mayor. C'est la première fois qu'un Premier ministre se rend à l'Hôtel de Ville d'Ottawa pour rencontrer le maire. We have a lot of other exciting things in the future as well. We're moving along the path to invest in Lansdowne Park and build a new event center and Northside stands. That's going to help us attract major events in the future, national events, international events. We have the World Junior Hockey Championships coming later this year. And we just announced last week that we'll be hosting Ironman Canada, one of the world's largest triathlons, next summer. So no matter what challenges we face, I believe if we work hard and we work together, we can build a better Ottawa for everyone. An Ottawa that is safe, reliable, and affordable. Une Ottawa sécuritaire, fiable, et abordable. An Ottawa with a strong economy. So to everyone in the room today, thank you for believing in our future. À toutes les personnes présentes dans la salle aujourd'hui, je vous remercie de croire en l'avenir d'Ottawa. I believe that for Ottawa, the best is yet to come. Thank you, merci, have a great day.
We're really grateful to His Worship for making the effort to make that video so he could be here with us today. So Cindy, if you could tell him it was well received, that would be great. It's now my pleasure to bring to this stage the Chair of the Board of Directors for the Ottawa Board of Trade, Brendan McGinty, to bring greetings.
Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue. Welcome, and thank you, Suling, for another awesome kickoff to what I know is going to be a fabulous day. I remarked as I walked into this building today, I like Ottawa history, lifelong resident, that this building was constructed in 1917. That was a number of years after the Board of Trade was founded in 1857, 10 years before Confederation. 167 years ago, this coming June, business leaders, community leaders came together in downtown Ottawa to chat about the challenges of the day. They got together and decided that it wasn't up to a fledgling country which had not yet been founded. It was not up to government and local elected officials only to pick up and work together to deliver on some of the priorities at that time, 1857, when Parliament Hill was known as Barracks Hill, where you would find tents and soldiers. 167 years later, we're gathered here in a historical building built by our forefathers and foremothers, our ancestors. And it's rather telling that we are coming together, business leaders, members of the public sector, our private and not-for-profit community leaders and interested citizens to chat once again about the priorities of the day. So I want to thank you for that on behalf of my board colleagues, on behalf of the Ottawa Board of Trade and our partnership with OBJ. I want to thank you for taking the time. This is important work. It's important collaborative work. And if you would allow me for a moment, because I'm not a politician, now there might be a few in my family, but I'm not a politician. And I want to speak very briefly about the challenge of downtown Ottawa. It was last spring that the Ottawa Board of Trade, very much like the canary in the coal mine, picked up the mantle and said, hey folks, we're going to have a big problem. You know what? We got a big problem. Let's not sugarcoat it. There are opportunities to collaborate, and we're going to hear more about that. We're going to hear from Mary Rowe. We're going to hear from our public sector leaders. But the federal government, as our largest employer, has the responsibility. The elected officials who represent us at all three levels of government have a responsibility to treat this community with respect and help us transition the downtown core to a modern, vibrant community. Last week, the federal government announced that 50% of its office space across the country would be vacated. Now, in Ottawa terms, that could be as high as 2/3. of downtown Ottawa office space vacated. Now, I'm not going to stand here like some politician and demand that everybody go back to work 5 days a week. That's shrinking from reality. We want to embrace change. Whether it's Shopify, the City of Ottawa, or the federal government, we all understand the value of a hybrid workforce. We're all chasing talent. But we've got to pull together. The city, business community, and the federal government must pull together. Otherwise, and I went to school in London, Ontario, and used to visit Detroit, and I'm not being dramatic. In the late 80s, you did not want to be downtown Detroit. So that's the challenge. I'm not sugarcoating it. We've got to come together, and we've got to get the funds, and we've got to bring the creativity and the partnership to get this done. I know we can do it because in 1857, community leaders and business leaders built this community. So it's not up just to government, it's up to us. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great day. Very appreciate it. Merci. Salut.
Thank you very much, Brendan. So we're going to get started with our first session. As Brendan mentioned, a year ago, we started becoming very focused at the Board of Trade and called on every level of government in the business community to do the same on revitalizing downtown Ottawa as a key economic driver for our city, for our region, and for our country. We engaged with the Canadian Urban Institute, and we have invited Mary Rowe, the President and CEO, a few times to Ottawa to talk about what she was seeing across the country. And in the last year, she's working very specifically with us in Ottawa to create a new downtown Ottawa action plan. So she probably needs no introduction, but I would like to welcome to the stage Mary Rowe, the President and CEO of the Canadian Urban Institute.
I keep waiting for you guys to be sick of me. I just keep, I'm like, I just can't quit you. I'm the only one old enough to even know what that means, that reference is for. Really pleased to be back here, but also more importantly to be able to share with you views from across the country. And as Brendan just suggested, the challenge that you're facing here in Ottawa, I just want to say, first of all, it's wonderful to be at a city building summit initiated by the business community. It really is. It's really important. And there was a time when it was very difficult to engage the business community on these issues. You didn't actually think it mattered. We sort of in Canada had this feeling that, the city will take care of itself and government will intervene and it'll all just be fine. And over time, we've started to recognize that this is what drives urban life. The reason we have cities is because of commercial activity. This is why cities formed. This is why we came together millennia ago, to have the kind of exchange that the business community and that the economy stimulates. And so at CUI, we always talk about we're about the intersection between people and place, where the magic really happens. And I'll put my, I can't see this screen. I can see it beautifully. If you'd like to come on the stage, you can see really beautiful slides. I also, when the mayor was on, I put my sunglasses on and I could see him a little bit better. Just saying. Anyway, I continue to suggest that what happens here is relevant to what's happening around the country. And so that's why I invited some of our colleagues to come on to Zoom today to talk to you about the downtown challenges that they're facing. And you will see that you are not alone in facing what you're facing. In fact, it's an inflection point for urban Canada across the country, and we're going to talk at the second panel about the role of the federal government in sort of catalyzing some of that. But a lot of this predates the pandemic, it predates the kind of work from home patterns that Brendan just referenced. And these are things that have been incubating and happening for a while, and cities are always changing. So you'll see a few slides here that I will remind you, and then my colleagues across the country will magically appear on the screen. Okay, next slide. I can do it. Hey, hang on. I have the power. So, I've spoken here before about why downtown matters. It still does. This is a generational initiative. Those of you that are young are going to be at this for a while. Those of us that are not so young are going to be also at it for a while. We have to remember why downtowns matter. What happens if we don't? Brendan, apocryphally, I'm from London, Ontario, so I know Detroit back then. I remember Wolfman Jack. Detroit is a really thriving place now, but that's 35 years, and we don't have 35 years, right? So there is a dystopian picture which suggests that downtowns could hollow out and that everybody will go and live happily ever after in the suburbs. I don't think that's likely to happen, but it's going to take intentional actions on our part to figure out what that looks like. Do you remember this picture? It's the only picture people remember from mine. Why do we care about downtowns? Because an apple rots from the core. And so that's why we always have to remember that cities are organic. They grow from the center. You're all gardeners, I know, you're from Ottawa. You're all gardeners, you're all expecting what's going to happen in your lovely backyards. Just remember, you tend a city the way you tend a garden. So the apple, remember, it rots from the core. And then, of course, there's this, the patoola factor. Where do you go when you're feeling lonely? You go downtown. So we have to continue to remind ourselves that downtowns historically, go back and listen to that tune, it's still true. We used to go downtown because something different happened. When you're alone and life is making you lonely, you can always go downtown. It hasn't always been about work. It's actually been about experience and exchange and having something happen there that doesn't happen anywhere else. So that's what you're incubating. And my colleagues, I'm sure, will say the same things. So in terms of our engagement here, CUI has been really pleased to be working with many, many, many partners, including the Board of Trade and the city and tourism and the National Capital Commission and Destination Ottawa, all the folks that are investing with you in the future of this place. And what does that take? And you're going to hear more about that next month when we release this action plan and build on all the other work that's been contributed over time. Because you don't actually build cities quickly. They happen incrementally. And the kinds of things that we need to think about is the financial sustainability. The mayor hinted about it. What are the revenue impacts to actually manage the city, manage the services that you need to make the place work? And then what does it happen to the actual regional economy? Because remember, it's not just about you. I know you think it's all about you, but it's not just about you. It's about the region that surrounds you. It's about Gatineau. It's about all the other kinds of businesses and enterprises that feed into this region. And it's about Ottawa as a gateway for newcomers and different kinds of international events. I was listening to the CBC this morning, I'm sure many of you were, about that International Plastics Conference that's going on. The world is here. The world comes to Ottawa, it comes to Canada, often to Ottawa first. So just not to put too much pressure on you, but just recognize that you represent to many, many, many folks around the world what Canada is and what Canada can be. So the evolution of your downtown, we believe, needs to embrace cultural assets, the commercial core, the surrounding neighborhoods, create that mixed-use district, the most complete kinds of neighborhoods you can get, with unique characteristics of which you have so many. You have so many unique assets. Lots of other places, I'm sure my colleagues here will all say, when we get them on the screen, they'll say, oh, look, you've got a lot to work with. Here's what we're working with, our assets. This is what they look like. And there's lots and lots of envy for the assets that you have. The question is, how do you actually deal with the jurisdictional challenges that you have in terms of managing those assets? So all the things that are in these slides, you'll see when we release the report in a month. It has a call to action. It's going to engage everybody. It's going to be about economic viability. It's going to be about how do you, just what Brian, where are you, Brendan? Talking about how do we actually attract workers and retain them, because we're competing for talent, as you said. How do we actually continue to sustain with the public services? How do we get enough revenue to do that? And then what is the robust mix of drivers? All of this has to contribute to the well-being of everybody that's here and everybody that will be here as Ottawa continues to grow. 4 components that we think are at the center of it. I want to hear my colleagues from across the country reflect on this. Downtown needs to be desirable, needs to be robust. That means a lot of diversity. Needs to be resilient, needs to be inclusive. And so each of those characteristics have descriptors. We're going to toggle that out with you over the next several weeks and talk more about how do we actually ensure that this is what we're building: desirability, resilience, robustness, and inclusion. Now, thanks to the power of modern technology, I bring to you Vancouver, Calgary, I hope, Montreal, and Halifax. Can we see them? There they all are. I just want to acknowledge that smiley face at the top of your screen, if you can see it. Hi, gang. We're in a fabulous refurbished building with a lot of sunlight, and so you're a little washed out. But your voices will be strong, I know. And in the top left corner is a smiling face, and bless her, because it's 6 a.m. in Vancouver. And there she is at her desk. Jane, bless you. So we're going to go from coast to coast. I'll start with you, Jane, because you win the gold star for getting up so early. Jane runs downtown Vancouver. Just give the audience here a bit of a snapshot about what you're facing in downtown Vancouver. And welcome to the Ottawa City-Building Summit. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, Jane.
Good morning, everyone. I think, like all of you, we're facing very similar challenges around community safety, social issues, affordability, mental health, addiction, housing. I think we could all talk about this all day. We're all experiencing it. One of the things that we're also experiencing here is the difficulty of doing businesses for our businesses. And we're really working hard with our city government to make sure that it's easier to do business here in Vancouver. All things considered, I think Vancouver has weathered the pandemic relatively well, and we're progressing positively in a number of key metrics, but there's certainly work that needs to be done, and it needs to be easier to do it.
Jane, what's the key obstacle in terms of what impediments do you need the city to pull down to make it easier?
Oh, Mary, I mean,
how can you start? Yes.
There's
how long
so
have we
much.
got?
I would say, number one, we have to make it easier to get permits.
Right.
We spend an enormous amount of time on seemingly small permitting issues that really just shouldn't take anywhere near as long as they take. I think the will is there. You know, in every conversation that we have with every level of government, really, the will is there, and we are all fighting the same fight. But it does seem to be challenging to reduce those barriers to doing business. And chief among them, I think, is the amount of time it takes to move permits and projects forward.
There's lots of,
come down.
Just so you know, Jane, lots of nodding heads here in Ottawa. They feel your pain. Let's go to Calgary. Mark, you've got sunshine in Calgary. You must be thrilled. Tell us the view from your desk there in Calgary.
Well, thanks, Mary. I mean, yes, blue sky Calgary, rebranded, blue sky and lots of sun, which is fantastic. I don't think you're going to hear anything different from us than what Jane had just mentioned. And I think from across the country, we've got our social inequity issues that are challenging us. But I think Calgary is at a great moment in time in regards to the investments we're making and what we're seeing as the next spend for downtown. I mean, downtown Calgary is not a place, it's the place. And Calgary, with the expansion that we've seen over the years with suburbia, we're still dealing with those 15-minute communities to get people downtown. Our office to residential conversion, I think we're leading the way in North America for that work. But we need to address the vacancy still, similar to what's going on in Ottawa. We need people back. We forget the economics. But if I was to look at, upside of where we're at, and you think about the money that we're investing in arts and culture, we will be the leader in this country for arts and culture investments with, obviously Arts Commons, Glenbow. We've got street redesigns. There's a lot of money. We're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars being invested as sort of the next step of how we're proactively coming out of the pandemic and making the ongoing investments that need to be made in sort of a parallel track of what's the next step, what's the next recovery strategy.
I joke that when you think about, well, which Canadian city is on the front page of the Washington Post? Where do you think it is? It's his. Calgary is on the front page of the Washington Post because of its proactive steps around downtowns, which you've been at for about 10 years. You had a bit of a jump start, right, Mark? Because you had the office relocation start almost a decade ago. Are there things that you've tried in Calgary that you realize maybe don't work and you have to tweak differently?
Yeah, I think that's part of the challenge is how do you get the consumer, how do you build that consumer and community confidence to get back downtown? I mean, We're all dealing with transit safety, mental health and addictions, housing shortages. We're looking at being very proactive around making unique experiences. And I think that's what we're pivoting to now is how do we program space, public space that we haven't programmed before, and what are the potential partners that we need to establish to make great space. I tend to follow Montreal a lot, and my dear friend Glenn, of what's happening downtown. I think Montreal got to jump on all of this because I can remember Montreal back in the 80s where they couldn't maintain roads, but now it's in their DNA around public space activation and the uniqueness of downtown to get people from suburbia to come downtown. To your point, Mary, where do you go when you're feeling low? Downtown. We've got to build that back. And I think Calgary, we're really strategizing and making the investments. Like I said, billions of dollars being invested in downtown infrastructure, transit, park space, arts and culture as that key economic driver in the future.
Yeah, the patchouli factor, I hear you. It is interesting to make this shift, though, from thinking that downtown will take care of itself, that's where people go to work, to actually we're going to turn downtown into something, as you're suggesting, Mark, investing in the public realm so that you create places that are so dynamic and unusual that people go for that. So perfect segue to you, Monsieur Glenn, to talk about what Montreal is facing, but also to talk about the quartier, because you made a big bet in Montreal to invest, and if you've not seen the Quartier de Spectacle, Glenn's going to tell you about it, but also the challenges it's going through. Over to you, Glenn, in Montreal.
Bonjour, Mary. Merci beaucoup. Yes, I mean, I like to remind our friends that Montreal isn't going through its first rodeo, right?
Right.
We've had many crises in the past, and we've rebuilt our downtown post-referendum in the 90s after we've lost most of our headquarters. So one of those elements that we've inherited is the Quartier des Spectacles, which is Canada's and actually North America's largest cultural district. 50% of all the cultural tickets that are sold in the province of Quebec are sold in the Quartier des Spectacles, which is 1 kilometer square, which is smack in the middle of downtown. Mind you, downtown, which is a word I'm not a big fan of. I'm much rather talking about city centers. Where we are lucky in downtown Montreal is that we're not just a central business district. We are also Canada's largest university cluster with over 300,000 students in our downtown. And we also have Canada's fastest growing demographic when it comes to downtowns. That last year alone, we're talking about 15% increase in our residents, and we're not done yet. We still have thousands of units in construction. This does not include potential conversions that are in the talks. We are following closely what's happening in Mark's downtown in Calgary. But all that to say that we are lucky in the sense that we have a very diversified downtown that was ready pre-pandemic, which it results is that today, despite us having at least 40% no-show in our offices, our foot traffic in our downtown is equal, if not superior, to what it was pre-pandemic. Now, mind you, it's not all positive. Our sales are down in downtown Montreal, and that's throughout different uses, whether it's service, retail, hotels, that despite having a very strong tourism back in our downtown. Important to know that 50% of all the tourists that come to Quebec pass through downtown Montreal. That's roughly 11 million people last year alone. So we're very lucky for that, but we have many threats. Mark talks about our maintaining roads. I like to say that we're maybe doing too much of a good job of wanting to maintain them. We have many festivals. One of them is the Orange Cone Festival in downtown Montreal. And I can go on, but I think we don't have enough time. But I must say that perhaps the biggest threat that we have looming around downtown Montreal is the mental health and opioid crisis that is now beginning to show its nose in downtown Montreal, and we are not ready for it. And we are watching closely what's happening across Canada and North America, but I insist we in Montreal are not ready for this, and it is slowly but surely getting out of hand.
Yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. And interesting your comment about people, that part of the Montreal strategy was introducing more residences, more opportunities for people to live downtown. So we're back to this intersection between people and place. We're going to come back to the mental health piece. It's just too pervasive and too present in everyone's lives at the moment. So we'll talk a bit more about that. And also the Quartier, how you, I know, have adjusted your programming because we have some challenges with funding festivals. I'm looking for our cultural stakeholders here in this room who I know are seized with this. How are you experiencing things when you watch Just for Laughs and some of the other festivals having some financial challenges? Glenn, how are you going to weather that?
And the answer is we don't know yet. Our financial structure here is based on mainly public funding. We have the highest taxes in Canada here in downtown Montreal, and one of those assets, it doesn't pay for that much cleaning, but it does pay for our festivals.
Right.
The problem is that the model does need to be adjusted.
Right.
And we're not there yet. We are holding discussions with the Quartier des Spectacles and the industry of our festivals to see how we can better fund them. But the sad truth is we are also asking ourselves, do we maybe have too many? We are now up nearly 100 festivals here, some large, some very small. So maybe we're going to start targeting our strategic assets. I am happy to say, though, that our discussions with the Just for Laughs partners do indicate that Just for Laughs will be back in downtown Montreal this summer, maybe under a different form, but we are looking for a transitional model to protect that asset. Great,
great. I can see my colleagues from the city nodding. This is a larger issue around how events and different kinds of activities occur in a city, and the municipality doesn't actually reap very many resources from them and end up being stuck with all the garbage and the bills. So this is a part of a larger conversation about how we need to restructure how we finance cities. Just saying. Paul, let's hear from you in Halifax, your particular perspective from the HRM.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be back in Ottawa. I've been there 3 times in the last fall, and I was hoping to get there today, but great to be here with some of my favorite people in the world, and also Mark Garner. It's always my tendency to, when I leave town, I'm supposed to say great things about how great everything is going in downtown Halifax. But Mary, you've got me all fired up here today, and so did Mr. McGuinty. So I'll tell you folks the truth about what's happening here. Things are okay in downtown Halifax. We're never a boom and bust kind of town. We watch what happens in places like Calgary, which seems to be kind of all in or all out of things, and we just kind of chug along. So we haven't been hit as hard, I think, post-pandemic as some downtowns. Whenever I feel bad about how things are going here, I pick up the phone and talk to Kate in downtown Winnipeg and feel much better about our situation. Our pedestrian visitation numbers are kind of back up to pre-pandemic levels. Our sales are doing okay. But that's also a bit of a challenge because we know that there's a lot of we're experiencing all the same challenges that every downtown here is facing. And I think our biggest issue right now is there's no sense of urgency at all. Certainly from any level of government, and I'll kind of use this example we like to do is every time there's a speech from the throne or our premier gives a state of the province address or whatever, we always like to count how many times does the word downtown come up or downtown Halifax, right? So at the federal level, 0. Our premier mentioned downtown Halifax twice in his recent address, and that was both in the context of how nice it was to get out of downtown Halifax to do it in the real parts of Nova Scotia. Our mayor is speaking next week in a State of the City address. He'll talk about downtown a lot, but he's leaving office, so he'll talk about his legacy and how he's revitalized downtown. But that's kind of all pre-2020. So there is simply no momentum around doing anything different or recognizing that there are some real challenges that are coming. So, certainly my congratulations to Ottawa to pull a summit like this together. We wouldn't be able to do that here in Halifax. There just isn't that sense of urgency. So one of the things that we're trying to do as Downtown Halifax Business Commission, or we are doing, is we're actually casting a whole new vision for downtown. We're looking to launch that June 5th. We've had extensive consultation with stakeholders and the general public. But again, we didn't pull together a broad coalition. We kind of sat down with my board and said, we've got to do this. We're the experts on downtown. Let's just put out there what we think is important, based on some public engagement. Let's get out there, and then I'm going to be spending the summer, talking to all the candidates that are running in our next municipal election about A, why downtown's important, and B, why this is the plan to follow. And I think what we're looking at is we look to places like Calgary that has kind of a downtown revitalization strategy. We have nothing like that, and so that's kind of what we're pointing to is we need to have that. We need to have that kind of effort. Because private sector does look to the public sector for inspiration and confidence. And I think we know from talking to our developers, is they say we don't see any confidence from any level of government on the future of downtown Halifax. In fact, some levels are actively moving people out of downtown. So that's kind of where we're at now. I would say that the downtown Halifax, we're living off of events right now at the moment. So our tourism is still strong. We've had we've got a really good destination marketing organization that's here. I mean, we're just a great event city. So whether it's conferences or we're hosting, Sail GP that's just coming up. We just hosted the Junos. Events that happen here, just have a bit of a different flavor when they happen in Halifax. People get excited about them because it's so much fun to be here. So we're kind of living event to event. And the events have been great, very successful, and that's what's driving our visitation numbers. But deep-seated issues, around all the same challenges that you're having as well. But I think maybe what's different here, say as compared to, I would say maybe Calgary and Montreal, just really a lack of sense of urgency that we need to do anything differently than what we did pre-pandemic. So that's really concerning to us.
Okay.
And I think our numbers will slide. Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. I think urgency can't be your friend. I guess that's the challenge. Canadians don't always leap to urgency, but I do think in other parts of the country there is a stronger sense of urgency, including, I think, here, to the point where the Prime Minister actually walked down to the Mayor's office last week and actually met with him. I think it's the first time a Prime Minister has, I'm looking to get confirmation of this, first time a Prime Minister has actually walked into the City Hall. Right, good. And actually initiated that conversation and had a conversation, and Downtowns was part of it. So this idea of urgency is never waste a crisis. Who coined that? How do we actually leverage that? Paul, the other commonality you have at HRM that you have here in Ottawa is that your cities both include large rural communities, right?
Yes, exactly. Halifax is the city limits. We're larger than Prince Edward Island, and so we're actually the largest rural community in Nova Scotia as well. So again, politically, that becomes a bit of a challenge. We've got 16 councillors. One of them represents the downtown. We've had a very pro-downtown mayor. We've got a couple of very pro-downtown councillors or candidates, that are running for mayor next time. So we're hoping that that focus will continue. But that's always a challenge for us, and part of our challenge, I guess, with our vision is not only articulating what we think is important, but articulating in a better way, I think, that we've done why it's important to people that live in rural areas and in fact outside of Halifax altogether.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the narrative. I'm again saying nodding heads here in Ottawa because this is part of the narrative that we've got to try to blunt, folks. We can't make it a zero-sum game. It's us against them. Oh, the rural against the urban, or the downtown versus the suburban. We're all in the same ecosystem. We are all interdependent. People work in both places. They shop in both places. They travel in both places, all places. And so how do we actually stitch together a narrative that's more useful? I'm looking to see if there are local council members who can actually inform for us, how do we actually bridge this gap between being representative of your constituency, but also understanding that you are part of a stewarding of a broader whole. So I want to talk about mental health, but I'm also just going to give the audience a heads up. If you have a question for any of these cities and you want to ask a quick question of these guys on the ground who are going to tell you what they see out their door, put your hand up and we'll get to you. So put your hand up if you have a question for any of the cities that are here. And I want to go to mental health for a second. Jane? Vancouver has been, sadly, the poster child for mental health challenges on main streets, and now we've all got it. I'm not blaming you, but it's just part of the dynamic that we're all facing. I'm wondering, I might ask all of you about this. Mark, you've been on this for ages. I know Glenn's just suggesting it's just coming his way now. Do we imagine a moment when we could get the federal government to lead on mental health, which they will say is not their jurisdiction, but they said housing wasn't their jurisdiction either. So what I'm curious about is, do you see a role for some sort of national leadership or pan-Canada leadership to help us address what stewards of downtowns are experiencing, the crisis in mental health, addictions, and homelessness? Jane, I'll go to you first. And if you have a question for the city, put your hand up and I'll come to you. Go ahead, Jane.
Absolutely. And I think in order to address any of the pervasive issues that are affecting our downtowns, mental health chief among them, we have to have every level of government at the table. This isn't something that a city can lead with help of the province. We need the city, the province, and the federal government all together. And one of the ways that they can help is advocating for us, supporting us, but also providing funding. There is a shortage of funding to properly address mental health issues in downtown. And I'll tell you, one of my biggest concerns is the fact that I think people are losing empathy. And I never have a member call us and say they don't want people to get help. I think they do want people to get help, but that help isn't coming. And as a result of that, I think people are losing their collective empathy. And once that happens, we're going to have a much bigger issue than what we have right now. The business community needs to continue to care about the people who are struggling with mental health issues on the streets, and they need support from the provincial and the federal level. What exactly that looks like, I wish I knew, but it would start with a serious conversation, arriving to the table, coming to the table, and providing some funding. It's urgent, and it has to happen.
Mm-hmm. I often say that cities are fundamentally about collective empathy, that we interact with people who aren't like us all the time. One of the dilemmas we have is if you're not leaving your house to go to work, or you're not traveling as much into neighborhoods that aren't yours, the opportunity for you to be exposed to people of different experience diminishes. And I worry, like you do, Jane, that people now, when they experience something like this, the other issue is that you feel helpless. You see someone who needs support, and there's not much you can do. And so it repeats this feeling of alienation. So I hear you on this about what are the implications of that diminishment of a sense of collective empathy. Mark, you've been on this for a while. What's your view in terms of the mental health interventions and the community safety implications?
Well, good question. That's probably another complete session, Mary, just to have this conversation and what's happening across this great country of ours. As you know, as you mentioned, been working this for a lot of time, not only in Toronto, but obviously in Kitchener-Waterloo as well, and now in Calgary. And I think, yeah, to Jane's point is people are losing their empathy. They've lost their patience, you know?
Yeah.
The challenge I think we have in downtowns is based on property values back in the day, all services are located in the downtown core, which implies that the problem is the downtown, in the downtown. That's where everybody is. And the answer is no, it's in these suburban communities as well. So, you know, you need a distributed model. You can't have a big 380 room place in your downtown core. You have to have something smaller, but also you need to really understand what is the composition. We tend to talk to this about homelessness. And based on our calculation here in Calgary that we do every year, you know, we have 2,700 people that are homeless in our community, but we don't break that data down to determine how many of the 200 or 2,700 individuals are actually going to get housing if housing was available. And we've been able to do that calculation to determine 250 people will never accept service.
Right.
So what do? Do we turn our back on them? No, you've got to find interesting solutions to these complex issues. And I think one of the things that we've done differently here in Calgary, and Mayor Gondak stepped forward on this based on work that CDA had done, the Chamber had done, BOMA had done, as well as NAOP and our real estate partners, to collect data to tell what the problem is. We wrote a 9-point action plan. We delivered that message to the mayor. It convened a table here called the Downtown Safety Leadership Table, of which we spent 7 months of doing in-depth consultation to determine what do we need to address. And you start to find out you have chronic issues with certain individuals, so we need different solutions for those individuals that are creating 80% of the challenges that we're seeing in the downtown.
But what's
and that report,
But
sorry,
Mark,
Mary.
Mark, what's interesting, I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm going to get the other two in. But Mark, what's interesting to me about what you're talking about is that you initiated, as a business leader, you initiated these actions to get those tables set. You didn't wait for it to suddenly be solved by somebody else. I think this is the inflection point we're at. We kind of all have to get engaged here. We're all stewarding these spaces, and as much as you may not want to, if you're a commercial real estate owner, I know you're already engaging with this. You've got staff who are experiencing it in the halls, in the stairwells, in the lobbies. They see it every day. So the question is, how do we equip ourselves, I guess, to be able to be skilled to come up with some solutions? This table sounds like that's what you're trying to do. Mark, yes?
Yeah, it really is, too. I think the conversation that we're into is this is a community issue, and the community needs to find the solutions, identify the gaps, and how we're all going to lean in on this, because you can't just point to the other province. We all own this, and we all have to take an active role if we're going to solve these problems in our community.
Few last words to you, Glenn, and then Paul. Go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, well, I'd like to go back to the whole jurisdiction aspect, Mary, which I like very much. You know, you did the comparison with housing. I like to do the comparison with dental health. You know, if the federal wants to touch dental, I think they can tackle mental. That's the priority
From
that we
dental
have
to
right now
mental,
throughout
yes.
the country. And it is a national crisis because if you know, God willing, one city finds the solution, the problem will move to another one.
Right.
And as much as I love to agree with Mark on the element that we need to take leadership and the business community needs to step up, it really upsets me to see that we need to take that leadership because no one else is. Our businesses, our property owners, our retailers, our hospitality industry should be focusing on what their main job is, which is to do development of their business, to be more competitive, to generate more taxes that ironically allows us to fund the services that we need for the marginalized populations. Unfortunately, they need to focus a tremendous amount of their energy towards fighting a national crisis that is not of their doing. Now, I'd like to let you know that, you know, faced with this crisis that is growing, and mind you, in Montreal, we're really just at the tip of the iceberg compared to what we're seeing elsewhere. But we are, and we being here speaking as well, is very frustrated to see that just like the housing crisis, we've seen the writing on the walls and did not act in advance. So we hope we'll be able to. Therefore, Montréal Centre-Ville has mandated, and we're in the works of conducting an economic study to measure the economic impact of the homeless and mental health crisis in downtown Montreal on our economy. Because we are not social workers, we are not experts on the matter, but we'd like a lot, much like we've done with global warming, show that not only is it, you know, something that's a threat for human beings, but it's also a threat for our economy. And I must agree with you know what Jane said, and I think we can all agree on one of the biggest threats also is that, you know, our empathy and the empathy of our business community is now being confronted with their instinct for survival.
Right.
If their business does not survive, their empathy goes out the window. There's
Right.
nothing left. And we all know that our businesses are the front lines. Very, you know, behind the scenes, nobody very much brags about this, but when it's cold outside, the homeless keep warm in our businesses. When it's too hot outside, they cool down in our malls and our properties. They use the bathrooms of the private sector, which remain open by empathy.
Yep.
Until there's no longer that empathy.
Yeah, we hear you. And as you say, when you get pushed to the brink, and remember, this is what main streets and downtowns and cities have always been about. They're about commercial life. And when other kinds of uses interfere, when the commercial life can't thrive, that's the dilemma you have. So we're right at the edge of the end of this session. And Paul, the riskiest thing to do is to give the last word to a Maritimer. So with that in mind, a brief comment from Paul McKinnon in Halifax. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm never brief, but I always talk fast. You know what? I think just on those last points with Glenn, I mean, we're big fans in this industry of R&D, which is rip off and duplicate. There's probably nothing happening in Ottawa that hasn't been experienced or isn't being experienced now with one of these other cities. So we like to think we've got all the answers. In fact, we have most of the answers collectively. I think the big outlier is social issues. I think that's the challenge we're having. Like Glenn, we're only experiencing that very recently, and we honestly thought by the time it got to Halifax, Nova Scotia, Western Canada would have figured out what the right answers were. And I think in some cases maybe they have, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So I guess we're disappointed in that, and so we're willing to roll up our sleeves and work with you. But it's important that Ottawa is a crown jewel of our downtowns in Canada, and it's important that Ottawa, you know, is still a beautiful downtown, but obviously has some challenges. And I think the sense is, and we've asked this recently, this will be my final word, is we've asked recently both the public here and our members about momentum. And amongst the general public, there's still a positive thought about momentum. Downtown Halifax is still going in the right direction. 60% of our public thinks that way. Only barely half of our members think that way. So there is a challenge about, you know, if you ask this question 10 years ago, everybody would say downtown Halifax is much better now than it was 10 years ago. People aren't saying that now. They're not saying it about Ottawa. They're probably not saying it about most of the cities here on the screen. So we need to get that momentum back.
Get it back. I always say CUI is in the connective tissue business. We are in this situation together. Urban Canada has lots to learn from each other. Would you join me in thanking Jane from Vancouver, Mark from Calgary, Glenn from Montreal, and Paul from Halifax. Thank you. Interesting for us to just hear from you. How do you see the role? You've each come at it from 3 different perspectives. What particularly unique role do you think Canada needs to have in this city, in terms of the future of this city? How do you see that breaking down? Jennifer, you pretty much laid out an enormous investment that's enriching this city. But any particular principles that you're putting into play when you think about dealing with your host, this place?
Sure, I'll give it a go. So our boundaries in the work and influence that we are quite distinct because it's the parliamentary boundary. But as you can see, there are 3 key areas where we have a very significant input. And, maybe we've been perceived to be quiet in the past, but I would say in the precinct, we've never tried to be quiet about the work we have done, and we've always been very open to partnerships and strategic alliances to help get that work done and cognizant of our impact on others. So first and foremost, Parliament is within the city boundaries and not just within the city of Ottawa, but important to the National Capital Region. One, because it is the center of the federal government and will continue for the foreseeable future, like for the next 100 years at least, because that's the kind of investments we're making, will be key working buildings for our democracy. So unlike a downsizing, we're not going anywhere and we don't intend to go anywhere. And we want to make sure that what we're doing there works with and that we have support from those that are around us. So in terms of the parliamentary program, safe, secure support to parliamentarians to make sure our democracy functions is our primary purpose. But Parliament has a very big mandate in terms of its outreach. And so we're very dependent, and as you saw, for example, with the convoy, we're very dependent on other levels of government and with the city to make sure that that precinct remains safe and secure.
Mark has a plan 10 years. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It started happening already. I know that. It was started to happen probably 2 years ago. He has a 10-year plan. The federal government represents 50% of the leasing market in Ottawa. It did anyway a couple of years ago. So the impact of the federal government from an office standpoint is big. So we have a 10-year window to rally, come together, and I know the Ottawa Board of Trade has started to do that, are working on this. How can the community, it doesn't take only the federal government, it takes the business community, it takes the developer, it takes the building owners, it takes all of these people, the city, to come together, tous les intervenants, in order to build the Ottawa of the future.